The Philippines. As Spain gains access to the silver of Potosi, they also need a way in order to get that silver into China so they can purchase Chinese goods. By conquering the Philippines, that gives them access to China. They can use the Philippines and Filipino merchants in order to go and trade with China and get access to China's goods using the silver that they are mining out of Potosi. Which is why, from Potosi to Manila in the Philippines, there were these Spanish galleons that would transfer silver and goods back and forth. They were known as the Manila Galleon. Does that make sense? I would write that down because Manila Galleon is a pretty important one. However, as time goes on, the Portuguese, largely because the Portuguese are just not as big, are not as wealthy, and don't have access to as many resources, they begin to crumble, and Spain gets bankrupted by the inflation caused by so much silver that the Spanish also lose power. This then allows the British and the Dutch to enter in. And in order to help compete, what the British and the Dutch do is they create joint stock companies. These are private companies that are going to have multiple owners. And it's a way of making trade less risky. Instead of only Peter, I think I can use you in classes perfectly. Instead of only Peter shipping a massive amount of soccer balls across the ocean and that ship sinking and Peter losing all of his wealth, he is going to invite Axel. He's going to invite Gibby. He's going to invite Nate. He might invite Zach if Zach's nice to him. He's definitely not going to invite Alec. But what you're going to see is you're going to see Peter inviting all of these people to be in a company with him and to share in the risk and share in the profit. Does that make sense? That's what it means by joint stock. In addition, these joint stock companies were getting so big and became so powerful that the governments of Britain and the Netherlands would issue charters, just like you read about, granting them a monopoly over trade in Asia. So any spices, any tea, any sort of thing that is coming from Asia and is getting shipped to Europe can only be done by these companies. Does that make sense? And with a massive company so close to the government, of course, you're going to have corruption. Of course, you're going to have other issues that develop. But both the Dutch and the British are going to do that. One major difference is when they get into and try to smash their way into Indian Ocean trade, you're going to see the Dutch largely using warfare. And they have that capability. Number one, they're big and they're wealthy enough to have their own army. Number two, if they get into any sort of trouble, the Dutch army is going to come and help them. And so you see the Dutch largely conquering Philippines after Spain, and then other places that they are going to completely destroy those who they take over. The British, on the other hand, are going to move their way into places largely through negotiations. Will they use a strong-arm tactic? Absolutely. But they're also and mostly going to be making trade negotiations. This is best known in India. As the British East India Company begins to develop trade relations with the Hindu princes and then eventually the Mughal dynasty, you're going to see them actually enter into trade relationships and pit both the Mughals and the Hindu princes against each other, playing on that religious rivalry in order for them to gain power. Nate.
I believe the Dutch is so powerful. Like, why did they become really have enough money and power to trade?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because Britain, number one, is a small country, and the Dutch are a small country. And that's largely because they have what is given credit is oftentimes the democratic nature of both Britain and the Netherlands. Both were fairly decentralized in power. Both their monarchies were fairly weak. And so, because of that, the monarchies developed even more special relationships with merchants. Does that make sense? In addition, both are very coastal countries. The Netherlands is going to be very involved in the Hanseatic League and the Baltic region in trade. In addition to, they're also very well connected to the Rhine River and the Danube, and then eventually the Danube River. So they have access to inland trade as well. And the British, of course, have the ability of doing the same thing across in the Atlantic, in the in the Channel, and everything. So geographic and political nature, and that's largely it. At least that's my understanding. It's an incomplete answer, Nate, but that's the best I got right now. Good. And then, of course, you have mercantilism here, and this is where you're going to see trade in commodity over luxury goods. Remember, access to the wealth of the world is what you wanted. To measure your wealth and your power, you would measure it in the amount of gold and silver that you have. If you have bullion or gold and silver, and you have more than others, you are winning that race. You have a bigger piece of that pie. One of the ways, and then of course, during this time period, you're going to have the spice trade in the Indian Ocean, the silver trade, which is going to be the most important, holy silver. If you don't get anything out of the early modern era, but if you can remember, silver is the first global commodity that is wanted and demanded all around the world. You've got to remember that. Fur, because we went through the little ice age I wasn't there. The world went through the little ice age during that time, and then of course slaves, which is a demand for having cheap labor, are going to be sent from Africa over to the Americas to replace the natives who died off. That's it. And then the last thing I want to highlight is that Europe does not control things yet. The modern era, that's going to be Europe's era. But not yet. Europeans are simply entering in, smashing in, and becoming middlemen in the Indian Ocean trade networks and around. They are going to profit off of facilitating trade, not controlling it. Does that make sense? All right, and I probably... okay, so... It's not. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Columbian Exchange. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to get to our essay writing soon. But the Columbian Exchange is probably one of the most important impacts of globalization during this time period. And the Columbian Exchange is going to see the transfer of goods, people, and diseases across the Atlantic Ocean, and then eventually across the Pacific, which is going to dramatically alter the population of the world. First and foremost, the first thing that we see becoming and most notable is this idea called the Great Dying. And in the Great Dying, you see the transfer of diseases from Europe to the Americas. Largely smallpox, measles, and flu. Killed 90% of the natives. That is staggering. 90%. That is a lot of people. And of course, you know that in some cases it was accidental, in other cases it was very intentional. But it's a reason why Europe is able to conquer the Americas so easily.
Wait, what do you mean it was intentional?
They actually would send over blankets of sick people to spread disease. That would be the Mongols. Also intentional. And for some reason, we like it when the Mongols do it, but not when Europeans do it. Yes, Zach!
What is the 60 to 1990?
I believe that's potatoes, and I don't remember what. That's a good question. Yeah, I think that's 60 million to 390 million. I think that's what that is. Yeah, not the potato population, the population increase. That's good. There are only 60 million potatoes, and then holy potato! Anyway, so 90% of the native populations. Don't forget though, the natives did get Europeans back because they gave the Europeans venereal diseases. So sexually transmitted, infections now? It's not STDs, it's STIs, whatever that is. So the Europeans were gotten a little bit back. Ha-ha! So, probably the biggest impact of the Columbian Exchange is the transfer of American foodstuffs across the world. Because of the American foodstuffs that grow easily and in a lot of different places, the world population is going to explode. So because of maize or corn and potatoes, Thank you, Zach, for pointing that out. 60 million in 1400 to 390 million in 1900. I know that seems like a lot of time, but you got to remember, population had not increased on that scale ever in history. Did we already figure that one out? We made that job. Okay, so to the Americas. You also have to the Americas. Remember, one of the things that the Americas were lacking in the agricultural revolution was beasts of burden. So you're going to see beasts of burden. And something that's considered an American icon is the wild Mustang or the Bronco. That did not exist in the United States or the Americas until Europeans brought it. I love how I end this. Fruit, rice, wheat, sugar, vegetables, and destruction of the environment. It's ridiculous. How did bears? Those are environmental effects. Here are cultural effects of this time period. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that with trade always comes the spread of religion. But please don't forget that with the spread of religion also comes the syncretism of religion. So some of the examples of syncretism would be Vodun in the Caribbean, Vodun or voodoo. Or Vodun is going to spread and mix with Catholicism. Vodun was an African tribal animistic religion, believing in animal spirits and essentially spirits in general, human spirits as well. That would be combined with Catholicism. That is what voodoo is. So the prominence of voodoo in the Caribbean, the prominence of voodoo in New Orleans is because of the slave trade. Sikhism in India. Islam is going to largely spread to India thanks to the Sikhs. Excuse me, I lied to you. Thanks to the Sufis. Sikhism is going to be the syncretism of Islam and Hinduism in India. Yours, over there. Yeah. Swami Vivekananda? Now, I also talked about Sufis in India, which were those mystical Islam who promised a personal connection with God and largely responsible for those spinning dances. So I always think if you spin long enough, maybe you'll have a spiritual connection. I think I just had that. Whoa. Okay. You also have the reforming of old traditions. Ladies and gentlemen, something that we talked about, and in second semester we've gone over very quickly. Many places around the world, because of the increased interconnectedness, traditional faiths were being challenged. Traditional faiths promised universal truth, the answer to everything. But when your world gets shattered, and the world isn't flat, and all of a sudden there are people who don't look like you and talk like you, who have very different beliefs than you, you have to answer to that. And because of those increased interconnectedness and the changing of the world, you see the reforming of old traditions. What we talked about a lot in our class is the Reformation. That's Martin Luther getting very angry, like many of you will be doing soon enough, and writing 95 thesis statements, which you should all be doing, 95 thesis statements about how he disagreed with the Catholic Church, which started the split between Catholics and Protestants. Similar things were happening all around the world. Al-Wahhab was an Islamic man in Saudi Arabia who disagreed with the syncretism of the Ottoman Empire. He thought that Islam was being defiled by outsiders, and particularly the wealth of the merchants that were crossing through his desert and going to Mecca. He thought it was disgusting, and so he wanted to go back to the basics and go back to fundamental Islam. And that's why Saudi Arabia practices today a Wahhabi version of Islam. Wang Yangming and the Cao Zheng movements are two reform movements in China. Wang Yangming was one who believed that inner truth was possible for anybody who did not need your Confucian education. Cao Zhang was one that focused on evidence-based learning, similar to what the scientific revolution was. And here we go. Told you I'd talk about it. The arts. With the increased amount of money in people's pockets because of trade, the increased amount of wealth around the world, you are going to see the arts being promoted, and not just by the wealthy, but also even more so within common people. Well, at least merchants. I wouldn't say common people. The Renaissance in Europe is going to be a flowering of art and learning. Woodcuts in Japan. Whew, that's really fun. And woodcuts in Japan actually really influence modern art as well. But that's something that you see particularly with what artist always does that? I forget. But those woodcuts in Japan. Codices, ladies and gentlemen, again, if you're going to talk, leave. Just go. If you're going to talk, go. Because I'm yelling and I'm going and I'm moving. If you're going to, it's not worth it for me. Okay? Gross. Okay, codices or European descriptions of Aztec and Inca. That's largely why we know about Aztec sacrifices, because they were visually represented and written down. And then Japanese miniature paintings, actually Persian miniatures, Persian miniature paintings were something that spread around the Ottoman Empire in particular. Good. We also have social organizations changing. Increased demand means that you're going to have shifts in the way people work and how people are socially organized. You're going to see peasant labor intensifying all around the world because there's a need for cotton and for silk. Europeans during the early modern era are introduced to 3 bitter substances that have dramatically altered my life. Number 1 is chocolate. Chocolate. Tea, which I didn't discover until college, and I used to think I was really mature as I was drinking my tea, talking to people and girls, and I thought I was mature. Tea is another one, and the last, which is probably the most profound impact on my life, is coffee. But here's the deal. All of those 3 things are bitter, and Europeans are wussies. And so they needed sugar in order to lighten that burden and be able to drink those substances or eat those substances. Which is, and of course you all know that because none of you like sugar in your chocolate, because you like the 99% cacao while you drink out of your hydro flask. I love your Patagonia, and then I wear your Lululemon. So, essentially, what we're looking at here is, because of that, you are going to see the development of plantation economies that are going to go away from small farming into larger, massive farms that are going to produce cash crops like sugar and eventually tobacco, things that can be grown quickly and easily and that will turn a profit. You're also going to have new systems of coerced labor. Slavery, of course, and the slave trade is probably the biggest example of that. But you're also going to have other types of coerced labor. When I say coerced labor, just to repeat this, coerced labor means forced labor. So coerced labor, indentured servitude. In order to make the trip from Europe to the Americas or other places, some people would pay for your passage over. In return, you would then owe them a certain amount of years of work. You weren't their property, but you also weren't able to leave their service. So you'd be doing the work of a slave in order to pay for your passage over. Once your time commitment was up, you were free to do whatever you wanted. Usually, you can't afford that, and so you're going to wind up having to continue to work for your former master. Another example is the encomienda system. The encomienda system is the economic and social and political system of Latin America. After the Spanish conquer Latin America and many of the natives die off, the Spanish crown assigns different groups of natives to individual conquistadors and says, you need to protect their bodies and you need to protect their souls. Protect them from warfare, keep them from fighting, and convert them to Catholicism. What did the conquistadors decide to do? Enslave them and tax them. enslave them and tax them for protection and saving of their wealth and conversion. Usually it meant forced conversion, sometimes to the point of torture. So that's the encomienda system. There were new and political economic elites. That was the answer to the question. Sophie!
When you say like coerced labor,
Forced.
yeah, no, I get that.
Okay.
But, like on the AP test, can we just say slavery, or are you saying that?
Not if you talk about the encomienda system.
No, I know, but like you say like forced migration, like that's slavery.
Not always.
When they bring the slaves over from Africa.
Well, that's slavery. But slavery is something specific. It's a type of coerced labor. So indentured servitude is a type of coerced labor, but they're not slaves. They do slaves' work, but they're not slaves. That make sense? Slaves are considered somebody's property. You are owned. Does that make sense? An indentured servant is still a free well, it's not they're not property. They're just not allowed to leave. They're under contract. Like a football player. Can't leave a team because they want to. Well, I guess they can, but they don't. Does that make sense? Oh. So what are we arguing about?
I wasn't arguing.
But not arguing. What are we confused about?
Well, I was just saying, like, you keep using, like, other words for slavery, so are we not supposed to say that on the AP test?
No, you can say slavery if you're talking about slavery. But if you're talking about indentured servitude and you say slavery, then it's different. You good? I think so. I can't tell. Okay. New political and economic elites. Of course, we know the Costa system in Latin America, but you also have the Manchus who are going to be used as bureaucrats within the Chinese Ming dynasty, and eventually the Manchus in the Qing dynasty as well. Or not the Ming dynasty, in the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty is going to see the Manchus take over. The Manchus are going to have the Manchu-style haircut, and they are going to maintain themselves as the political elites of China. The Manchu-style haircut is going to be a bald head with just a small portion of hair in the back, which is probably eventually going to happen in soccer players. They're just getting there eventually. Half the head is now, a quarter of the head is shaved now. Eventually it'll be just half the head, and then it's going to be all the head except for a little thing here. Anyway. And then not Peter's hair, though. He's got the classic spike up. Traditional elites are also going to be maintained. Ladies and gentlemen, just because we see merchants gaining power, it doesn't mean that traditional nobility are going to lose it. In Japan, the daimyo, or local warlords or landlords, are going to maintain authority. Those who have agricultural land will maintain their wealth. And then, of course, the nobility in Europe, which you're going to see heavily influencing both politics and, of course, the economy. Do I need to review the Costa system? The Costa system is the social and political system of the Latin American colonies, colonial Latin America. Those who were born in Spain are the Peninsulares. The Peninsulares, who are going to be the political, economic elites. They're going to be the top. Only Peninsulares are allowed to be in high government positions. Those fully European Spanish who are born in the Americas are the Creoles. They are automatically second-class citizens to the Peninsulares just because of where they were born. Because of the immigration or the migration of Europeans to Latin America, you obviously have mixing that happens through mixing, and that is going to create a new class of the mestizos and the mulattoes. Mestizos is the mixture of native and European. Mulattoes are a mixture of African and European as well. And then, of course, you have the natives and the slaves below that. Does that make sense? Thank you, Sarah Engmeyer. You said yes. Your new empires. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to want to know these empires, and I'm going to go through them extremely quickly because we're running out of time. What I want you to be able to do is break them up into two different types. The first is Europe. Europe being a small area that it is going to expand over the ocean. They are going to take over places in the Americas. So the French, the British, and in a little bit the Dutch are going to conquer into North America. The Portuguese, the French, the Spanish mostly are going to be taking over Latin America. And those are going to be those maritime empires. But you are going to also see the expansion of land-based empires, thanks largely to the adoption of gunpowder technology. Gunpowder technology starts in China, even though guns really start in Europe, but you will see the Ming and Qing dynasty using gunpowders and incredibly, oh perfect, I see that up there, using gunpowder technology in order to gain power. The Mughal, Ottoman, and Safavid are known as the gunpowder empires. Gunpowder empires, that's particular there. And then, of course, the Russian Empire in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Note, these are the growth of traditional agriculturally based empires. Pastoral peoples are not going to disappear, but they dramatically leave the main. They're no longer the major influencers of global affairs. So the Mongols are done. And just to get into it a little bit, we have two more things to go here, is the gaining